Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to a new edition of Creative Coding Barcelona. I'm not going to say much. I will leave Anna for the presentation, but I just wanted to thank you, the previous group of Creative Coding Barcelona, starting with Monica, that has handed over a little bit the event for us. We just wanted to recover or restore these kind of meetups to talk about creative coding and generative art. And today we have Anna. I'm not going to introduce herself. I will let you do that. But yeah, very interesting stuff. So, Anna.
Yeah, thank you so much. How long do you want me to talk for? Whatever. Okay, we'll be here all night. First of all, it's so cool to see so many people coming together for a creative coding meetup in Barcelona. My name is Anna Lucia. I'm a generative artist from the Netherlands, and I'm based in Berlin. Berlin also has a creative coding meetup, but it's cool to see this happening again here. So yeah, if you are a generative artist, sometimes people say that you are working at the intersection of art and technology. Yeah, and I think this is sometimes like a cliche that comes up that I think that's kind of funny. Whenever I see it written in a blog, I kind of like laugh on the inside, but I've come up with my own variation on it of what I do, and that I am an artist at the intersection of craft and computation. It's not really serious, but I like to say, if people ask, what do? I work at the intersection of craft and computation. And the questions that I'm going to answer today is like, so what do I do all day, if that is what you do? And why do I do it? Why do I work at this intersection? So I've made this nice diagram for you to kind of show you what an average day for me looks like. I think like these two parts, these are like, what am I doing? And then like the other two, the vertical lines, I would say this is where I'm asking myself, why am I doing this? And for any creative out there, for anybody who does anything innovative, it's very important to keep those two things separately. You don't want to be asking yourself why here and here. That's keep it separate. So you're doing and then asking yourself why, and don't get those two phases mixed up. It gets messy. So yeah, what do I do all day and why do I do it? Let's dive a bit deeper into these questions. Things that I do is that I make things with code in the browser. What I like about, let's see if this is going to work. I like to make things in the browser. The nice thing about working in a browser is that it refreshes, so you can animate things. And also, if you do things in the browser, that means they are interactive. So you can move around things. So that's kind of, I guess, the computation part. I also make other things interactive. I won't do the whole clicking again because I'll mess up all my browsers and presentation view. But this piece is also animated and interactive. So I think that's like the computational part of my art practice. But how did I actually even get started? I didn't go to art school. It's not completely true. I went for art school for 1 year. I studied fashion design and I ran away screaming. It wasn't for me. And I ended up studying engineering. And I loved studying engineering. You know, there was all these like math problems I had to solve and the creative projects that I had to do. And then after I graduated as an engineer, I started working as an engineer. And what I really quickly noticed is that the people around me were like, hey, you know, let's put you in more like management positions. You don't have to do the engineering. They didn't really see me in that role for some reason. So I was quickly pushed out of the kind of more technical aspects of work and into management positions. And I really missed it. Like I'm deep down, I'm quite nerdy. I love solving problems. So in my free time, for some reason, I ended up on this website, and it doesn't look like this anymore. If you've seen the details, I had to look this up on the web archive to find out what it used to look like. But this is the processing website. I think a lot of you are familiar with processing, and I started to teach myself how to code in my free time. I actually never was interested in coding when I was still in university because I was like, I never want to be a programmer. And here I am. And I quickly ended up here. I'm sure a lot of you have also been here. It's a great place. Anybody who wants to learn creative coding who's never done anything, like go to the coding train on YouTube. And I started doing stuff like this. Let's see. Yeah, because I wanted to create problems for myself again. I wanted to create technical problems for myself again to solve. And maybe somebody recognizes this, but this is a double pendulum, which is like a chaotic system. And if the starting positions are just a little bit different, soon you start to see that all the pendulums are quite chaotic and start to spin in quite different directions. So I was looking for like kind of technical problems to solve for myself, and I started sharing these things on Instagram, and I started to suddenly learn that actually there was this like bigger creative coding and generative art community out there by just me doing these things. And then let's see, this happened. And a digital artist, suddenly sold an NFT for $69 million. And people suddenly cared about digital art, cared in the sense that suddenly there was money for digital art. And what I was doing just at home, creating these sketches and creating these problems for myself and solving them visually, suddenly became sellable in a way. And through the community, that's something that I dove into. And I don't want to delve like too deep into that in this presentation, but I think like undercurrents of what happened here are still cascading through my life today, and maybe also other people in this room, what this sale and other sales kind of led to. Part of what happened at the moment, there was an platform, an NFT platform that came up called Art Blocks. And Art Blocks is specifically for generative art. I don't know how familiar you all are with it, but you put an algorithm on the blockchain, and once that algorithm is minted or bought, the artwork actually comes into existence onto the blockchain. And I started developing a project for that platform. And while I was starting to think about developing a project for that platform, I found out that Walter Gropius, the founder of the Bauhaus Academy, believed women incapable of thinking in 3 dimensions. Now, this was 100 years ago, but for some reason I felt very seen in this. And I already had an inkling that there was a reason why, even though I was graduated as an engineer, I was put into management positions. I had like a feeling that there might be a reason for that. But this kind of put that nail, slapped it on the head. I was like, yeah, I think there's still people around me that might think I'm not capable of thinking in 3 dimensions. So what was the result of him believing that a lot of the women that actually came to study at the Bauhaus Academy were kind of nudged into the weaving workshop and were kind of not incentivized to maybe study things like architecture or design. And nowadays we widely celebrate the works of art that came out of this workshop, but we don't actually know what these women would have achieved if they would have maybe studied architecture or other fields. But I was kind of inspired by that, and also still feeling 100 years later, kind of recognizing that as a working engineer. This is Annie Elbers, and she's sitting behind her hand weaving loom. And this was kind of the starting project of my first array, is also getting the craft into my computation. Now, there's another cliche that I'm going to bring up, that whenever I bring up the fact that I work with craft and with computation, people bring up the Jacquard loom, as I'm also doing here today. because they say, okay, there's like this interesting intersection between like where the loom was and that like was the start of the computer. And that's true. Like you have this beautiful loom, and the idea of a woven fabric is that you have all these threads of fabric that are like this, and you have to pull them up in like different way. Like let's say you have like hundreds of these threads, you have to pull up different ones and then throw the other thread underneath it, and then these punch cards above can take care, like automate like which threads go up and down. And this was kind of a precursor to the computer. However, I don't think that this necessarily has much to do with craft, because this has actually more to do with like we are taking the craft out of it because we're introducing computation. And that's like where my work more comes in. Like, can we put that craft back into the computation? Because on the left, you see how it was done before you had like the punch card pulling up the threads. It was usually like a young boy that sat up there on the loom with a craftsperson telling them like which threads to pull. Was probably before any labor standards that this was the case. And I think it's a very good thing that we got punch cards. And then on the right, you see like, although we suddenly had punch cards and that like one punch card could be used like many, many times to create the same tablecloth, there were still people required to actually manually make these punch cards. But the women at the Bauhaus Academy didn't actually work on these jacquard looms. Like you saw in the picture, she actually worked on a hand weaving looms that has like threadles or like paddles that you push that pull up the right threads for you. You still manually have to throw the thread through it. And these are a lot of textile samples that Annie Albers made on this machine. And I can imagine that they actually made these samples to then later be translated into punch card to be used on these jacquard looms. There's also an example of a Dutch woman who studied at the Bauhaus Academy, obviously in the weaver's workshop, which was her place. And she would make these samples, but then also make the punch cards. And she made like the designs for most of the tea towels at the time in the Netherlands. So this inspiration turned into my first artwork on the blockchain called Loom. This is Loom number 0, but it's from a bigger generative system that in total has like 200 different looms. So these are several outputs, and I didn't look much at the aesthetics of necessarily the work of the Bauhaus. I think it was more their story that inspired me and like started me on this path. But the mechanism of the algorithm itself is based on one of their hand weaving looms. So under the hood, it actually makes a pattern that these machines use to read. And another thing that I want to show, maybe connecting a little bit to the Beeple thing, the only way that at that time, or maybe still, a generative artwork could come into existence is by a transaction on the blockchain taking place. And by that transaction taking place on the blockchain, also your work of art immediately becomes a commodity on a marketplace. If you're participating in that, that's what happens to your work. So first of all, for it to even exist, there needs to be a transaction, because that hash of that transaction becomes the seed for your random number generator in your algorithm. And then if you go to the artwork page of your artwork on the Artblocks website, it is presented as a market. These are the default settings. It's immediately like default to like your pricing to low to high. So yeah, that's if you make generative art on the blockchain. People saw my work that I had done with Loom, and one day, as happened, somebody on Discord DM'd me and asked, "Have you ever heard about the G's band quilters?" It's like I had never heard of the G-Bent quilt makers, and I went to Google and I immediately fell in love with their work. The G-Bent quilt makers are generations of women from African-American women from Alabama that have been making quilts for generations and been teaching, like from mother to daughter, the art of quilt making. They didn't have a lot of resources to make these quilts, so a lot of the quilts were made from scrap fabrics for whatever they had around them, or a lot of these women actually did work in the textile industry, so they were able to take maybe scraps home from their work and then make these quilts from that. And I started talking with this person on Discord about this, and he was like, how do you feel about making a generative art project around the quilts in collaboration with the G-Bent quilt makers? And I thought about it, but actually quickly came to the realization that I would love to take them up on that. I think what is so interesting about their quilts and why I thought it was interesting to do a generative art project around it, not only because I'm interested of this idea of craft and textile art, but also I think because you can see an algorithm in their work. Like I'm only showing here 8, but there's like hundreds of these quilts, and you see there is an algorithm. There is kind of a DNA or a code in there that they are all different, but something is going on that these patterns emerge, because these women also didn't work with pattern books necessarily, and there's also randomness in like what material they actually had there. So I thought the intersection with generative art was very apparent, and I studied specifically for quilt makers. This Loretta Petway Bennett, Essie Bendolf, Lucy Petway, and Louisiana Bendolf. These are the 4 quilt makers. I specifically looked at their work. And what I did this time, I did actually very much look at the aesthetics of the work. So I really looked at a lot of the quilts that these women made. I didn't really go into, I more really looked at them and then tried my hand at algorithms of recreating them. So and all these different quilt patterns have different names. So here's an example of a house top, but I call it the Lucy house top because Lucy Petway's house top is different from Louisiana's house top. And then I started to see, like, can I do kind of an interesting subdivision? Can I like mangle a subdivision algorithm around that it actually creates this house top? And that I did for like these 4 different quilters and for different types of quilts that they made. And here, for example, then I had the Lucy house top algorithm, and then it created these different house tops. And instead of this time having the artworks create by having that transaction take place on the blockchain, I wanted to have more control over the algorithm, over the final outputs. And I also wanted to have an opportunity for the 4 women that I was working with to also, instead of only the collaboration of the conversations that we had, but also to participate more in the final output. So what I did, I generated, I don't know how many, but like a lot of quilts. And I selected about 1,000. So I gave about like 250 to each quilter to select down from there as well. So I don't know how many here are on the table. And I started to select them all by hand. So I think this is also where kind of a slowing down from this like quick minting on the blockchain started to take place of like, no, let's take a step back. Let's actually just do this by hand. Like, let's print this all out and let's just select all these images by hand. And then like these curated groups I shared with the quilters, and they curated it down again to the outputs that they wanted, which became the final collections. And here you see like 4 examples. Another thing that I was able to do in the algorithm, which was quite interesting, is that I had these different kind of like on their own algorithms. Like I had, for example, my subdivision function, and then by certain parameters, I knew like, oh, that's going to have like the Lucy house top, but like with different parameters in that function, it would have the Louisiana house top. But I also started kind of like mixing and matching those things. So the women or like these different algorithms could also start to collaborate with each other inside the code. And you see like some outputs were very close to their original, like this one, but then this one, it starts to become quite messy and it would never become maybe a real quilt, or would it? They were shown on billboards in LA, which was kind of cool. And then maybe one of the coolest things about this project is that one of the daughters of one of the quilters that I looked at, she actually turned some of these NFTs back into real quilts again. So if you own this NFT, you own the right to quilt your NFT, which is so you don't really own the rights of the image, but you do own the rights to quilt it, which I think is really cool. And then you can also have your quilt quilted by Mary Margaret Pedway. And it was really cool talking with her, asking her like, okay, so you have this image on the computer of this quilt. So how do you make it? Like, how do you turn that into a quilt? And she was like, yeah, I just eyeball it. I'm like, a real crafts person. I thought that was really cool. But people haven't only like had their quilt like remade by Mary Margaret. People have also have their moms quilt their NFT, which I just think is really, really incredible. What they've also told about this piece is that they reworked like fabrics from the clothing of their grandparents into this quilt. And the project is called Generations. And I think it's just fitting. And I hope this is the kind of piece that stays for generations in the family. On this happy note, we go to another great quote from the Bauhaus University. Le Corbusier was a head teacher there. And one day, one of his students, Charlotte Perriand, came into his room. And apparently he didn't even look at her work, but said to her, "We don't embroider cushions here." Because apparently embroidering cushions obviously is not a worthwhile endeavor. It's not like high art. It's not important. It's not valuable. Yeah, I think differently. I think women's work in embroidery is incredibly important. I think the why of why I'm working with craft is starting to shine through here, because women for a very long time have embroidered cushions and have embroidered a lot of things. What I'm showing here today are embroidery samplers. So a lot of the time, either women were learning how to embroider, or women were maybe recording stitches recording stitches for a later reference. And they did this on so-called embroidery samplers. I say women, kind of what time am I talking about? Some have already been found like that are millennia old. And up until today, women are still making embroidery samplers. And these have also been found across cultures. So in the Americas, in Egypt, like Coptic Egypt, within Europe, like it's a global thing, and like for multiple years, throughout history, women have been making these embroidery samplers. Embroidery samplers were a way of like recording stitches, but obviously also books got invented at some point. So a lot of embroidery patterns are also just printed for references. And I've looked at a lot of these kind of references. The Internet Archive is one of my favorite websites on the internet, or not maybe my favorite website on the internet. And I love looking at really old books with really old embroidery patterns. And through that, the third project that I want to show you today, I made 33 million. So I started looking at a lot of the patterns and starting to see, are there patterns that I see recurring over and over again? And in this algorithm, these patterns are kind of like hard-coded as binary two-dimensional arrays. like either 0 or 1, depending is there a stitch or is there no stitch. And I started overlaying these different patterns, and this is the results of 33 million. And then to take it a step further, to not only have these pieces digitally, I turned the digital versions of these pieces inspired by embroidery samplers into digital works again, into physical works again with a embroidery machine. While I was working on this project, I stumbled on a bit of I got like a side quest, I would say. I think that's what happened. I wanted a tattoo. I didn't have a tattoo. I really wanted a tattoo. And I was working on this project, and at the same time, I was trying to figure out what I wanted to have as my first tattoo. And for some reason, I had decided that my first tattoo would have to be done by my best friend. So as one does, I ordered like a tattoo kit on Amazon. Don't do this. And I got her some fake skin, so she was like practicing tattooing, and she practiced some on her leg, and I was like, yes, let's do this. But I still didn't have anything to tattoo. And she was gonna leave the next day. She was visiting me in Berlin, and we were like, okay, let's just go out for a cocktail, have a drink. And at some point she said, but what about that sketch you were working on today? Wouldn't that be perfect for a tattoo? So I opened it up literally on my phone, and we're peering over that image and zooming in and zooming out. And then we selected that little glyph, that little man. I was like, he's doing like a cartwheel. That's cool. So yeah, that became my first tattoo. It's actually right here. So my real first generative tattoo, we didn't have like the proper stuff to like transfer the design. So first of all, like I transferred the design in my notebook, and then what we did, apparently you can use like cling film and the right tape and like Vaseline, and it will like transfer. And I got my first tattoo. But what is nice about this project is that it has actually become a lot more evolved since then. We've always taken hygiene standards very seriously, but it has gotten a bit more professional. And we actually realized from this algorithm that these glyphs, or this algorithm, can produce like a lot of different glyphs that work really, really well as tattoos. So there's a generative algorithm on a platform called avixhash, and people can kind of like play a little bit around with the parameters, and it creates, I would say, like a flash sheet. And you can go through these different flash sheets and create your tattoo. At the moment, there's 24 people in the world with a tattoo. I think there's 3 in the room right now. I'm starting a little cult. But the reason also why I bring this project up again, it seems maybe not that connected to the textile stuff, but I think what is important here, like there's a reason why we like using the stick and poke technique to do these tattoos, because it's translating that something that's very digital, that's very precise, actually onto the skin, but maybe bringing a messiness in there, bringing the hand into that very precise and digital artwork, and maybe having it not being a one-on-one copy. Another thing that I think is very valuable for me about this project, if we go back to that Beeple sale that suddenly put like digital art and generative art in this whirlwind, this is a very slow project, because for it to happen, 3 people need to come together at the same place. I have to be there, the tattoo artist needs to be there, and the person actually getting the tattoo. You cannot just like click and buy your NFT on the internet and that's it, and the transaction is gone and everything. So it's a very slow project, and I'm really, really happy about how it's unfolding so far. We're going to go up to 36. So let me know if you're interested. Still some slots available. So following 33 million, I wanted to kind of stay with the embroideries. And although I'm a bit about like craft and like having the hand in doing things with your hands as well, I'm also a very lazy person. I don't know if anybody has ever worked with a pen plotter, but the thing with a pen plotter is like you draw and then the pen plotter can go up and it can move to another part of the paper and draw again. Well, if you do that with an embroidery machine, it like pulls the thread over. So then you have a piece of thread that you need to cut. Recently, I found out actually how I can have my machine do the cutting for me. But at the time, I didn't know yet. And I was like, okay, I want to do more with embroidery machines, but I don't want to put myself in a position again where I'm cutting 1,000 threads. Another thing that I wanted to change in my next embroidery project is that I talked about how I was hard coding these embroidery patterns in the code. So I had these like binary arrays that contained the patterns, and I wanted to find a way that I could maybe generate actually these algorithms through a mathematical function instead of hard coding them into my programs. So somebody shared with me like an amazing resource from a book called Computerkunst, which means computer art in Dutch. It's a very old book, and it actually has these algorithms in I think it's basic, showing you how you can actually make these patterns. And in this book, they specifically reference making these patterns for embroidery patterns, which I think is very interesting. But what I think is maybe even more interesting about this reference is that if you speak a language, some languages have that occupations are gendered. So in English, you're just an artist, whether you're a woman or a man or a non-binary, or in Dutch, you are either a female artist or you are a male artist. They're two separate words because those words are gendered. I think in Spanish, it's the same thing. So when they are here talking about embroidery artists, they're specifically talking about female embroidery artists, which I think is just like a just on theme for me. So I used kind of these old algorithms to create these pieces called oefenstof, which is Dutch for maybe practice fabric, referencing these embroidery samplers again that I talked about before. And instead of making these cross-stitch patterns, I tried to make all these pathfinders in it as well, so I didn't have to cut this many threads. So these two things led to this kind of aesthetic. This is not like an algorithm that I made one algorithm that like all the outputs came out of that one same algorithm, which you saw in the other references that I showed. This is actually an algorithm that I more let evolve over time. So I would make an output, I would make an embroidery, then I would take that code and work on it again, like pick an output and like work on it more and more and let it evolve over time. And for that, I was inspired also by the textile artist called Sheila Higgs. She has a project called Minimis, which she has already been making for like decennia. She probably has made over 1,000 by now. She works on kind of like a small portable loom, which she makes all these small woven pieces. So outside of her practice where she makes like very big sculptural works with textile, she also just has kind of this daily practice of making quite small work. So that's something that I try to emulate in my oefenstof practice. Here you see like the algorithm evolving more, how it goes from one thing to the next. Here's some more outputs. In total, I made 52. Might make more in the future. I don't know yet. I think at some point I was like, yeah, but we're still like putting them on the internet, which like, can we do something with that animation again? So I also started animating the pieces. So I think this was kind of my latest project. If you want to learn more about me, I'm at Anna Lucia Codes on most social media platforms. I'm at Anna Lucia Writes on Substack, where I write about more personal things, but related more to fashion. If you're interested in that, and you can find me on my website or send me an email. There's a reason why I'm here today. This is a project that I did in 2022 called art for walls in public spaces. And I think I finally manifested the title of that artwork, or Xavier gave me the opportunity to do that, because actually one of these outputs is going to come to a public space in Granollers this Saturday. And I don't know if you can tell more about it, but it's going to be a community event, right?
Yeah,
Where we want to paint the wall all together.
Yeah. Pretty simple. We wanted to do some like activation on the streets. So I was looking for pieces that were kind of easy to paint and still fun and beautiful. So Anna did this like how many time ago? It's like
2022.
22, so 2 years ago. And basically, yeah, we're going to paint this collaboratively. We're inviting a lot of kids too, because we want them to feel part of it. So basically, we're going to mask the whole wall, and people can pick their color and just paint. So if any one of you wants to join, this is going to happen this Saturday on Roca Humbert Fàbrica de les Arts, which is a kind of a cultural place in Granollers. And thank you very much, Anna, for saying yes.
Yeah. No, I'm very, very excited about this.
If anybody has any...
Yeah, first of all, thank you for the presentation. It was great. And I'm interested, what are you doing beside this part of stuff?
In life?
Yeah. Just in life and work.
I play a lot of Victoria 3, if anybody is... No. No, this is at the moment my full occupation. So full-time artist for, as long as that NFT money will take me. And then we'll figure it out.
Great. Thank you.
I want to thank you, Alejandro, because I didn't see anything, and Pau for hosting the event. Thank you very much. And let's have some beers and chat and, meet each other.